Alright, here we are doing something different today. We're over at my buddy Dan Bastion's place in Michigan. He is doing his own Duff straight axle swap, V8, fuel injected, very similar to Gilligan. Also doing a first gen front end swap on it. Came over to help him with the fuel injection wiring because it is different from the 80s, mine's an 86 to 87. I think would be the same. Second gen, when they changed the headlights, the core support, the wire harness changed. You can see fuse box, totally different. First gens do not have that. So the wiring is a little different than what my truck was, the 86. So we're figuring out today, we figured we would make a video showing the difference between the first gen and the second gen, the difference in the wiring on doing the fuel injection swap. So far, Dan has got the original chassis harness back in the truck, routed along the core support. Fuse block is back in. That is all back as it was with the original 2.9 setup. Okay, the next step is, this is the majority of the 2.9 wire harness that came out of the truck. The small harness, I believe, with like the injector harness was left on the motor, don't need it. But what we're going to do is, the way this is laid out, this is how the harness was in the truck. Computer plugged in, firewall grommet. These are all of our plugs that would go to the bottom of the fuse block. We have 3 relays on the bottom of it. One is for the ECM relay, one is for a AC cutout relay, and the other is for the fuel pump wiring. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to cut this plug right here. It has our tan wires in it. These are the fuel pump wires. I'm going to cut this entire harness out of this and find out which plug it has, and if it works like it did on my first gen, should be able to lay right back in there and plug right back into the chassis harness, and we will actually have all the original wiring for the fuel pump to work, with the exception we may have to tap one of the tan wires into the also tan wire on the Mustang harness, just to trigger the ground to the solenoid, or to the relay. So one thing we did, or Dan discovered anyway, the 2.9 is a speed density computer setup, and it has a map sensor. It reads manifold air pressure. Dan is doing a mass air swap Mustang setup. So he's gonna have a mass air meter, and they have what's called a BAP sensor. It's gonna read barometric air pressure. It's gonna read the atmosphere. So what worked out really nice is the factory setup in the firewall, there's a bracket that the factory sensor slides into. All we had to do was take this off the firewall, remove the original map sensor from the bracket, and we installed the Mustang BAP sensor right back in, just like factory. And the way the Mustang harness is going to lay in here, everything's going to plug right in. This fitting actually stays open to read the atmospheric pressure. We're on the stock Bronco setup. This would hook to a manifold vacuum source like your power brakes are to read the engine's manifold vacuum. So nice, clean, looks just like factory, real nice. So this is the mass air Mustang harness. The ECM relay is on the inside of the firewall on a Mustang. We took the original Bronco2 ECM relay, which is at the bottom side of the fuse box. We just unplugged it from there and just plugged it into the Mustang harness, which will be inside the car. Okay, so what we did was we cut the plug out of the 2.9 wire harness that plugs back into the original fuel pump relay. This harness right here. This is our ground for the relay. It goes to pin 22. There's a couple different ways we can attach this to the Mustang harness. It's the same color wire. We can run it through the firewall right to the 60-pin connector, or we can actually use, there's a wire in the EEC test, little test plug. We can hook it into there to get our ground from the computer. There's a red wire in that harness. This is a 12-volt switched source. I'm going to find a wire in the Mustang harness that is going to be operated off the key. This will give us our switch source for the relay. This black wire, it plugs back in to the wire, the chassis harness here. It loops around, and it is getting our constant battery power from the fuse box. That is the relay's power. From there, the power comes out of the relay, and this is the original wiring for the inertia switch for the Bronco. This will go back inside the cab, plug into the original inertia switch, and the power coming out of it, which is this pink and black wire, is going to tie into a wire over here. And this plug right here is our pink and black. This is our power to the fuel pump. We have already powered it separately from the truck, just jumping the battery. We know the fuel pump works. We've pressure tested the fuel system. So now we just have to make a connection from this plug here over to the one that comes out of the inertia switch.
All right, I want to hold it right there for a second. Ran into an issue with Dan's truck that I haven't found before. I mentioned pin 22 is going to be the ground for the fuel pump relay wire. I have done a ton of 2.3 turbo swaps, a ton of 5-liter swaps in other vehicles, and across the board, pin 22 has always been the ground circuit from the computer that turns on the fuel pump relay. For whatever reason, Dan's computer was not, and you'll see in the video I mentioned a couple times about pin 22. At the end of the night, when we were trying to figure out some issues, we did run into some problems. Pin 22 was not anything to do with the fuel pump on his computer, and I believe it has something to do with the fact that I think Dan said the wire harness and the computer was from a '92 Mustang, and that would have been an airbag car. And Ford changed a bunch of stuff once airbags started coming standard in the cars, so the harnesses did change. So I believe that's why there was a difference. The computer that he used in his was a A9P, I believe, which would have been an automatic computer, I believe. So what we ended up doing, which is in the video, is we just ended up taking the ground wire for the relay, grounding it to the chassis, and that in fact just makes the fuel pump work off the ignition switch. So works fine. The only downside to it is you don't have that factory, when you first turn the key on, it won't prime and then turn off and wait for the engine to start. And if you ever get into a situation where his vehicle were to stall, if the key's on, the pump's still going to run, pump fuel's going to circulate, fuel system be pressurized. So we will go back later and find the correct wire on the computer for that. I got to do some digging through some information I have to find that, and we may make a correction to that and update it later. But I just want to be clear on that. I don't take pin 22 as always going to be the correct one. First time I've run into this, but I definitely wanted to address it here.
So the plug, the oval plug at the firewall, we drilled a 1/4-inch hole through the top corner of it. We fed through the 2 wires that go to the inertia switch. Inertia switch is plugged in. The pink and black striped wire comes back out, and what we did was I removed it all the way from the 2.9 wire harness and kept the original plug where it plugs in on the driver's side fender apron. These other 3 wires, I'm not sure what they are yet, if we'll even use them. If not, we'll just remove them and we'll just have a nice clean factory plug-in for the fuel pump power. And the wire, the ground, the tan wire, the green stripe, we lengthened that, shoved it through the grommet into the passenger compartment, and we will tap into the Mustang harness at pin 22, and that gives us the ground. When we turn the key on, we'll get the factory prime, pump will turn off. When the vehicle starts, the pump will kick on. Mustang harness, it's routed up along the non-AC heater box. Over top, we have the BAP sensor plugged in, salt pepper shakers plugged in, just waiting. We have the harness ran down the lower intake, plugged into the distributor, to the TFI. And over here we have the other part of the harness where it comes out. We have basically all the plugs for the, down there is all the emission control solenoids, AC, Over here, I believe this harness came out of an airbag car, so we have, I think, the plugs for the crash sensors and the airbag wires, but we also have the mass air sensor wire over here. So once the fender liner goes in, he gets his routing taken care of for the inlet and the mass air. We'll plug this in, route everything nice and neat down the on the plastic fender apron, and that'll be good to go. And on this side, the other problem you're going to have is on Mustang, the air box is on this side and the battery is over here. So the harness has your power hookup. You have a battery ground right here, this single wire black, that hook right to the battery. We're going to cut that connector off and put one on it just to connect it to the body. This is for air conditioning, not used. We'll get rid of that. We have the coil wiring, which will be fine because the coil will still be mounted over here. And then this is the engine harness, the power wires at the fusible links. Now this one we're going to have to eliminate this connector, and we're going to connect a new wire to it. We're going to reroute it back over and connect it over here. I think that's the simplest way to do it. So for the ignition wires from the chassis harness to the Mustang harness, what we did was, in this black plug right here, there's a thick pink wire. That is the crank only. I have a jumper wire going from there, and it is tied into, I took another plug from the Bronco original 2.9 harness, plugged it into here. So the red with little blue stripe wire, this wire is connected to here, to this red with blue stripe. Our crank is in there, and then I ran another jumper wire to another plug, and this is connected to the same red with blue wire in the Mustang harness. Now the other one is the red with the green wire. I had put a green wire to represent that, and that comes over and hooks to the red with the green in this plug, which goes to the same red with green on the chassis harness. So the fuel pump wiring, we came out of the inertia switch with the pink wire. We brought it out of the firewall grommet. It's just laid across here. This is all going to get cleaned up later now that we know that it works. We ran it over, and I used that same factory wire, plugged it right into here. This is what's sending power to the fuel pump. These wires here will get cleaned off, and everything will get cleaned up and routed right. As far as the ignition 12-volt switch source for the fuel pump, there was the red wire that came off the relay. We just had it up here. We just ran a jumper wire down to it, to one of the unused, one of these pollution control. This has a 12-volt ignition switch source. We tapped the fuel pump relay into that, and now we have fuel pump. So as far as the fuel pump relay wiring goes, we have the wire that we ran previously through the firewall to pin 22. Apparently pin 22 is not the same on this automatic Mustang computer. We're going to have to figure that out later. But with that wire just grounded to the chassis in there, the fuel pump is basically working off the ignition switch now, so it doesn't have the factory prime and then turn off. Anytime the key is forward and in run position, the fuel pump runs. So not exactly like it should, but we're going to find the correct wire on the computer for that. But for all intents and purposes, this will work perfectly fine. And now we have a fuel injected 302 Bronco 2.
video was pretty bad in the garage with the overhead furnace running and everything. It was kind of noisy in there. So it was cold, so the furnace had to be on. Sorry for that. Sorry for sitting around in the chair like that. I just recently had knee surgery. I'm still kind of recovering from that, so I was in a little bit of pain while we were doing that. But for the most part, I hope the video will come in handy for anybody doing 2.9 to 5 liter swap. Should work. Rangers, Bronco2s. I'm thinking 89, probably all the way up to whatever the last year the 2.9 was. I can't remember off the top of my head. So hopefully it comes in handy for somebody. If you notice anything that we had wrong, any corrections, leave them in the comments below. Definitely help people in the future that run across this. So just trying to do our part to help others along. So thanks.